I got to show y'all this here. There was a hearing today on Capitol Hill talking about voter ID and the usual being an asshole, Senator Ted Cruz. He thought that he could somehow check a sister and some others. You want that smoke? Here you go, Ted.
Chairman, I want to start with a question for each of the 5 witnesses. In your judgment, are voter ID laws racist? Professor Tolson.
Thank you for that question. So it depends. One thing we have to stop doing is treating all voter ID laws as the same.
Okay, so your answer, I want to move quickly, so it depends is your answer?
Yes, that's my answer.
Okay, so what voter ID laws are racist?
Apologies, Mr. Cruz, your state of Texas, perhaps?
Okay, so you think the entire state of Texas is racist. What about requiring an ID to vote is racist?
So I think, sir, that's pretty reductive. I'm not saying the entire state of Texas is racist.
You just said my state of Texas, so you tell me what about the Texas voter ID laws is racist?
So the fact that the voter ID law was put into place to diminish the political power of Latinos with racist intent and had been found to have
You're
racist
asserting
intent.
that. What's your evidence for that?
The federal district court that first resolved the constitutionality of Texas's voter ID law.
Okay, so your view is voter ID laws are racist. How about you, Mr. Yang?
I agree with Professor Tolson. Voter ID laws can be racist.
Okay, that's 2.
Context.
Mr. Science?
There are some voter ID laws that are racially discriminatory in intent.
How about in practice? In intent, fine, you say there's some racist with a malevolent intent lurking in the back of their mind. But let's just talk about it as a practical matter. When I go to vote, they ask me for my ID. I pull out my ID, I show it to them, I vote. Is that racist?
If the law that requires you to do that was motivated by racially discriminatory intent
what about the
under
effect?
our
Set
Constitution.
aside intent. Set aside intent. I'm asking about the effect.
Yes, in effect, I think that there are discriminatory effects from a number of voter ID laws.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Reardon.
I'm going to give the witness a chance to answer the question. Go ahead, Mr. Sine.
Yes, in effects, I think many voter ID laws are discriminatory, and in design. They are designed to have that effect.
Okay, Ms. Reardon.
No, sir.
Mr. Van Spakovsky.
No, particularly because every single state that has passed an ID law has put in a provision to provide a free ID to anyone who doesn't have one. The turnout numbers show it has no effect, and I would remind everyone that the current version of the Texas voter ID law for in-person voting, the Obama administration agreed in court, in a court filing, that they were satisfied with it and that it was not discriminatory.
You know, I have to say this is the wildly partisan nature of the Democrats' proposal. The record should reflect all 3 of the Democratic witnesses invited by the chairman maintained to this committee that voter ID laws can be, in many instances, in most instances, I think of the various ways they formulated, are racist. So let me tell you who disagrees with that. 35 states across the country disagree with that because 35 states have voter ID laws in effect. But not just 35 states. 81% of voters in America disagree.
I'm tired of his lying ass. Bottom line is this here. We're dealing with a true idiot in Ted Cruz there, Robert, and it is what it is.
Well, let's understand. It's the argument the Republicans have been having about voter ID. It was made for absolutely one reason, which is that you can look at the maps. Right about the same time the Republicans stopped winning the popular vote is when they started pushing these voter ID laws in the mid-'90s. After the Reagan Revolution, after George W. Bush, they saw the demographics of the country were changing, and therefore we started seeing the first rollout of voter ID laws in the mid-'90s. 1997, Georgia got its first voter ID law, and even at that time, you could use your light bill, your water bill, any public utility, those sorts of things as identification to say who you are and where you are. When that was not strong enough to get them in power, that's when they rolled out the 2005 voter ID. And this is what we saw sweep across the nation then, which were the more stringent voter IDs, many of which were struck down as being poll taxes, such as the Georgia law, which was struck down in 2006. And now we are in our 3rd wave of voter ID laws. The entire idea, as Reverend Jackson likes to say, is about skimming. It's not about making sure that every single person can't vote. It's about ensuring that 1 out of every 100 people does not have the right to vote. 1%. That's all it really takes to win an election. Donald Trump lost the state of Georgia by 11,800 votes, 80 votes per county. So the fact that all it takes is to make one out of every 100 people inconvenienced or putting a barrier in place to stop them from voting, that's all that they need to do in order to win elections. That's why Republicans in the Senate represent 41 million fewer people than the Democrats. That's why Republicans have not won the popular vote in the last 17 years. That is why in the House of Representatives, Republicans will represent about 50 million fewer people than Democrats, because they no longer need to win the majority of the votes. They simply want to mess with the rules, play around with the referees, and win on a technicality as often as possible. And that's what voter ID is about.
And we know exactly what these frauds are all about, Tiffany. And yeah, they are racist. We know what the intent is, Ted.
Yeah, we know what the intent is. We know what the impacts of it are, and we know how it's shifted the election results for the last couple of years. But what's interesting about the clip you just played, Uncle Roland, is that we are watching Ted Cruz fight on whether or not he is being called racist, whether or not the state of Texas is being called racist. And what I think that does for the other audience is that it moves them to decipher whether or not they believe he is being racist or he's not being racist to help his election in the future. This is about the impacts of voter ID laws being racist. This is not about whether or not Texas or he is racist. And that game he just played, where he tried to survey everybody and say, well, do you think it's racist? Do you think it's racist? Do you think it's racist? I think is a strategy that he's using to distract people from the impacts of what voter IDs do, how it has disenfranchised communities of color, and how it has helped the party, and also how there's actually no need. There's no need for voter ID laws, period. There's no need for them. Everybody should be naturalized to vote. You shouldn't have to re-register. Texas during the pandemic made it very difficult until the end of the last 2 weeks of election season, made it very difficult for anybody to register to vote online. During the pandemic, nobody was able to register to vote online during the pandemic. Very few states quickly turned around and said we could get people to register to vote. And so the nature of that conversation, that discussion he just had, totally distracted everybody from what the actual problem is and why voter ID laws are a problem. And instead, let's talk about racism, because I'm a white man and y'all keep calling me racist and y'all not gonna win that fight. And I'm sick of him. I'm sick of him doing it.
Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart.
Roland Martin's doing this every day.
Oh, no punches!
Thank you, Roland Martin, for always giving voice to the issues.
Look for Roland Martin in the whirlwind, to quote Marcus Garvey again.
The video looks phenomenal, so I'm really excited to see it on my big screen.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
I got to defer to the brilliance of Dr. Carr and to the brilliance of the Black Star Network.
I am rolling with Roland all the way.
Honored to be on a show that you own. A black man owns the show.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
I'm real revolutionary right now. Roland was amazing on there.
Stay black. I love y'all.
I can't commend you enough about this platform that you've created for us to be able to share who we are, what we're doing in the world, and the impact that we're having.
Let's be smart. Bring your eyeballs home.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared. You dig?